Welcome to JonGetsGames. Today I'll be reviewing Terraforming Mars. This is a 1 to 5 player game designed by Jacob Frixilis, and in this engine building game, you'll be taking on the role of a corporation trying to efficiently and effectively terraform the planet of Mars over the course of many generations. You're going to do this by crashing asteroids, comets, or even a moon into the surface of the planet, as well as cultivating bacteria, growing forests, or launching a nuclear bomb. There are hundreds of different things you can do in this game. I'll explain how it plays, and then I'll jump into my review. Here we have the board fully set up for a 2-player game, and you'll notice that there's not a lot going on just yet. Each of the players start with a scoring piece in the 20 spot for the terraforming rating, and this is Mars. It is currently cold, it has really no running water, and there is no atmosphere to speak of. We are going to continue playing this game until all 3 of the terraforming factors are maxed out. The first is oxygen. It starts at 0 and it pegs out at 14. The second is heat. It starts off at a very cold minus 30 degrees Celsius, and it will end the game at plus 8. And finally, we are going to get these water tiles down onto the board showing flowing water, and this is going to happen more as the planet heats up, but through a bunch of actions. And these must go into these lower regions on the board, as denoted by the blue sections. There are 9 of these ocean tiles, and once all of them have been put out onto the board, the game end condition is going to be triggered. So this is all about trying to get the most points while these terraforming ratings are going up as you can. So let's talk about what we're going to be doing on our turns. Here is our personal player board at the start of a standard game. You'll notice there are 6 different commodities in this game. We have money, steel, titanium, plants, energy, and heat. And we begin the game by making one of each of these things. Now, we each have to take a corporation, and if you want, you can all play with these beginning corporations and play with symmetric powers, but you also have this large stack of different corporations that you can play from. You'll deal 2 of these out to each player, and then you're also going to deal out a set of 10 cards from the very large stack. At this point, each player is going to decide which of these cards they want to buy into their hand at a cost of $3 each, and they're also going to need to figure out which of these 2 corporations they want to play as. Now, each corporation gives you a set of starting resources because, as you note, we don't have any of these resources just now. So this one right here would give the player $57, and then each corporation also has an ongoing benefit. This one will give them a discount every time they spend really expensive cards. Whereas the player could choose this one, only take $30, but also start with 20 steel, which is another resource that you can use to potentially build cards from your hand. This one also has an ongoing benefit of gaining $2 every time you play an event-style card. So in this case, let's just say that this player chose this corporation right here. They would then take these universal resource cubes and put them down into their area. The gold ones denote 10, so this shows them having 20 steel and 30 money. Now they look into all these cards in their hand, so let's talk about the structure of a card. In the top left, you have a number, and this is how much money it costs to actually play this card down into your area in front of you. Next up, there is a predominant color to the card. First of all, we have these green cards, and what these do is they go face up in front of you, and you can kind of make a splayed stack, and they, in general, give you upgrades to your resource engine down here, because at the end of every generation, you're going to produce one resource, or at least resources equal to the level of all these tracks, and these green cards, in general, increase those tracks. You'll see this card right here is a windmill, and it will let you increase your energy by 1, and you know this because this brown border is a universal symbol for increasing your production as opposed to just taking one of that resource. The next kind of card are these blue cards right here, and these you also put out in front of you, and these can be used once per generation to do various benefits for some of them, and then other ones just give you an ongoing benefit. This one called Shuttles right here just lets you spend $2 left every time you play a space card. So this brings us to the tags. You'll notice this tag in the top right. This is a space tag. So in the future, if you wanted to play a card that had a space tag like this asteroid here, after playing Shuttles, you would only have to pay $12 for this instead of $14 because of that discount. So all these things are going to interact with themselves in pretty interesting ways. And speaking of these space tags, you can buy space tag cards using titanium to help you out. You'll notice this symbol right here. That means you can spend 1 titanium to get 3 money's worth of value when it comes to trying to build this card. And likewise, whenever you have these cards with building tags, you can help build these with steel at a rate of 2 money per steel when spent to play these cards down. The third and last type of card are these red bordered ones, and these are events, and you can also tell by this little arrow in the top right. Now, when you play these, you'll actually end up flipping them over and not evaluating any of the tags or anything in the future. They are one-time events that do a bunch of things. Down here we see if you spend the money to crash this asteroid into the planet, then first of all, you'll get to increase the heat of the planet once. you'll gain 2 titanium to just put in here because I guess the titanium came in on that asteroid, and also you crash this asteroid into an opponent's area, thematically speaking, and that is what this shows. It has a minus and then 3 plants, and you'll notice the red border around the plants. That means that you remove one of those plants, so you can deduct 3 plants from one opponent's area. Whenever you modify any of the 3 terraforming ratings for the planet with water, heat, and oxygen, you will generate 1 terraforming rating, which is shown by moving this token up once on the track. Now this is also equal to your victory points, but in the middle of the game, when you generate resources, you will get 1 money for each of your terraforming ratings as well, in addition to the income that you have down on your player mat. So you're not only making more money, but you're also generating victory points by doing things like crashing that asteroid in, which increased the heat of the planet by 1. You'll also notice there are a couple spots on this track as well as one up here on the oxygen track where if you bring the indicator up to that spot, then the person who actually does this gets an extra benefit. In this case, they can increase their heat generation on their player board, and this one over here will actually increase the heat level of the planet. I think because you start to have an atmosphere, you get a little bit of a greenhouse gas situation, heat gets trapped, and the rating will go up, which gives more points and income for the player who was able to go from 7 to 8 on that oxygen track. The final thing on the cards I want to show you is these restrictions in the top. You notice this one shows 7% and oxygen, and that means that you cannot have windmills until you have at least 7% oxygen on the planet, which makes sense. You won't even have wind to be able to use these. And some of them also have limits. These dust seals can only be used while there are 3 or less oceans out on the planet, so sometimes you want to play cards before you cannot play them any longer, and sometimes cards you have to hold onto until later parts of the game when the terraforming ratings get to the point where you can actually put them down. So the cards also have victory points in the bottom sometimes. That's what this little symbol shows here, but you don't score that on the track because of course the track also helps you get your income. As you're playing the game, you're going to be putting these cards face up in front of you in nice little stacks and then modifying these indicators to show just how much things you actually make and all the various options you have to do on your turn. So when it is your turn, you get to take 1 or 2 actions, and actions involve playing cards from your hand as well as using any blue cards with actions on them that you've already built. For instance, this one, you can spend 4 energy immediately in order to gain a steal and increase the oxygen level by 1, and when you do this, you just stick it to the side to show that you can't do this anymore in this generation. As an action, you can also activate one of these 6 standard projects that are out there on the board. In general, they're not the most efficient way to get these things accomplished, but you're not restricted into the cards you have in your hand. You can just always spend 18 money in order to put 1 water token down onto the board as one example. There are 2 additional action option spots printed onto every player's board, and for these you have to have a requirement. You can spend 8 heat, as you can see here with these 3 bronze and 1 silver, in order to increase the heat on the planet by 1, which we already know how that works. And the other option is you can spend 8 plants in order to put a forest tile down onto the map. These forest tiles must be placed adjacent to another tile that is controlled by that player, unless of course they don't have any tiles on the board, and then they can put it anywhere. And as a general rule, whenever you put a tile down on the board that covers up any icons, then you immediately get that benefit. So in this case, you would get a free card from the top of the deck that you wouldn't have to pay for. If you covered up this right here, you would generate a plant, and if you would cover up this, it would give you some titanium. There's also an added bonus of whenever you place a tile adjacent to an ocean tile, you will generate $2 for each adjacent ocean tile. So placing here would be pretty good for the red player. They would generate a plant, they would get 2 money for placing adjacent to this ocean, and at the end of the game, every single forest is going to be worth 1 point for that player, but also every city like this that is controlled by that player is worth 1 point for each adjacent forest. So even though this forest is controlled by the opponent, it is giving 1 victory point over to the city, which is currently worth 2 points. And finally, you'll notice this little red oxygen symbol on the forest. That means once this is placed, you're going to increase the oxygen level by 1 on the planet, and of course, take 1 terraforming rating for it. And finally, we have 2 more action options printed on the board. The first are these milestones. Now you can spend an action to put a cube of your color into one of these spots, spending 8 money to do so, and then you can put another cube down onto one of these 5 milestones to show that you have completed that spot. Now, there's a threshold you must get to. In this case, you'd have to have 8 builder tags in front of you, and this would require you to have 16 cards in your hand, but once you put it there, it'll be worth 5 victory points at the end of the game. Over here with the awards, you'll notice that the cost actually goes up as these awards are claimed. So the first is 8, then the next is 14. When you go over here, you would put your token down and then choose one of these 5 awards that are available, but here you don't take the victory points immediately. All these do is unlock specific endgame scoring conditions for the person who has the most of that thing. For instance, here, the person who has the most stored heat at the end of the game is going to get 5 victory points, and the person who has the second most is going to get 2. If you spend 8 money and put this here, you might not get any points if you have 2 opponents who generate a lot more heat than you. So you want to try to unlock the ones that you are going to win, but you also want to do it early so you don't have to spend lots of money in order to make them happen. So play will continue around the table with each player taking 1 or 2 actions until each player passes. Once you pass, you're not allowed to jump back in, and once everybody has passed, the generation is going to come to an end. At that point, each person is going to generate all the resources that are available on their area, and in fact, if you have any leftover energy, you see this arrow, that means that energy immediately turns into heat. So you're not allowed to store energy. You have to produce it and then use it on that specific turn, otherwise you have to use it as heat, and heat is not bad, but you're probably going to want energy more. You then pass the starting player marker over to the left, and then you start the next generation by having every player draw 4 more cards from the top of the deck, and just like in the beginning of the game, you get to decide how many of these cards you want to purchase and put into your hand of cards by spending 3 money each. At this point, I want to briefly mention that there is an official variant in the rulebook that says instead of just purchasing from these cards, you can do a draft. In this case, you could draw 1 card from this hand, pass it to the left, and then take the 3 cards from the person on your right, and then continue to draft from here, taking 1 and passing until you have 4 cards available to you, and then from those 4 cards, you will purchase them at $3 each to put into your hand. Play will continue generation to generation until all of the water tiles are out, the heat is pegged out, as well as the oxygen. At this point, you are going to finish up that generation and then score your endgame points. You will have points already that you've gathered throughout the game, but then you'll also gather points for awards you've achieved, as well as milestones, and then again you'll get 1 point per forest, and then each city is going to be worth 1 point per forest that's adjacent. At this point, it's also worth mentioning that when you're placing cities down onto the board, which you could do with a standard project or several cards, in general, you're not allowed to put cities adjacent to another one. There are a couple cards that break this rule, but there are cards that break lots of rules in this game. And lastly, you will score the positive and potentially negative points for all the cards that you have played in the game, including the events that you may have played. For instance, this one being -2 points right here. You're going to have to break your big stacks up to find a lot of these cards, and many of these cards also have conditional victory points. For instance, this one gives 1 point for every 2 ants on this card. Well, there are only 3 ants there, so that's going to be 1 point for that particular card. Once these are all added into the scores, you see who has the most points, and they're the winner. Let's now begin the review of Terraforming Mars by covering a few positive points. And the first of these is that this is one of the best engine building games I have ever played. I love the various different things that you do to put gears within gears and just do some really cool stuff as you're playing the game. You start off with not that much going on, potentially 0 on all your tracks, although that is technically a variant in the book, but you're not going to be making much stuff, and you're just slowly building things out. That first generation, maybe you'll take 2 or 3 actions. That second generation, maybe you'll take 2 or 3 actions again. Once you're in the 5th generation, you're taking maybe 5 actions. But now that you're in the 9th generation, you might take like 15 to 20 actions because of all the different things that you're doing. There are 3 main engines that are going on in this game. The first is the green cards that you're putting out in front of you. They generate resources. 3 out of the 6 resources are just essentially money. You have money, steel, and titanium, and the steel and titanium give you discounts on specific cards. But then the lower 3, with the plants, energy, and heat, allow you to do cool things directly to the planet without even any cards. Like if you have 8 plants, you can build a forest. If you have 8 heat, you can heat up the planet, and that excess energy just turns into heat. But then the second type of engine that you're building is those blue cards, which are essentially buttons that you get to press every single generation. And these are just fun. You need to make sure that you have the resources available to you in order to press that button and do the really cool thing, which might just increase the oxygen level or do maybe some more significant things to the greater game board. But it's a wonderful thing that you are trying to balance. You need to build a good green card infrastructure to support those blue cards to feed them the resources they need. However, you don't need to go with those blue cards. I've seen people play very well with just prioritizing the green cards, just having tons of resources, and just doing lots of things out on the planet. It is possible to overreach and build too much infrastructure and hope that you can get the right cards to fill it in later on, and you can take risks like that if you want to, but it's just another option. The third type of engine in this game are all those tags that come on the cards. The microbe tags, plant, science, space, all these different things have various meanings to you. First of all, with the space and the building ones, that just means you get discounts with the steel and the titanium to build those cards. But with things like the space tag, the science tags, you are really building a science infrastructure. You feel like every one of those cards that you put down with that tag on it is making your corporation just better at science because there are many cards in the game that require you to be at a certain science tag number before you can even play them. Some of them require a lot of these science tags, and it's got a really big payoff to actually play that card down that needs all those science because it might be really cheap and do a huge thing, but that's because you invested in that. The same goes with the plants and the microbes. There's lots of synergy going on with those tags, and when you combine all three of these engines together, it's just a wonderful engine building experience. Positive number 2 also relates to the cards, but this has to do with how you acquire them. There is an extra step in this game between drawing a card and playing it, and that is that you have to buy that card. It's only 3 money per card, which doesn't seem like a lot, especially in the mid game when maybe you're getting like 30 to 40 money every single turn, but that can definitely add up, and it's a great extra decision that you have to make because you might draw a card that will be great in like 5 generations. But do you spend the money now and keep it in your hand that whole time, hoping to be able to get it out later on? Or maybe you just let it pass, use that money right now to keep bolstering the engine you currently have. It's a great amount of risk taking, and I've seen many games where people will be near the end of the game and they'll have like 8 or 9 cards. They're like, why did I buy these cards? Like, I'm never going to play them. I thought I was going to, and I shouldn't have. And, you look at those like maybe 5 cards that you didn't play, and that's 15 money that you could have had. And odds are good you would have been really loving that 15 money at some point earlier in the game. But the game does offer you the ability to liquidate your cards for $1 each. So I guess in reality, you're only investing $2, so to speak, into each of these cards, but it's just a great extra decision, and I love having it in the game. Positive number 3 relates to a seemingly tiny design decision that has wonderful ramifications on how you play the game, and that is that you take 1 or 2 actions on every one of your turns. Now, this doesn't seem like much, but what it allows you to do is potentially stall and just do 1 action every single turn to see what everybody else does, and maybe try to scoop up one of the terraforming objectives after somebody else does, because that the second step away from where you are gives you an extra bonus. It also might allow you to just let them do everything they want to do and then capitalize on what they did, and they'll have no way to come back in and mess with a chain of things you might want to do. But the flip side is allowing yourself to take 2 actions protects you from some of the meaner aspects of the game. There are some take that style cards that could remove resources from you. I'll talk about them a little later on in this review, but there are interactive ways that players can mess with each other. So allowing you to take 2 actions means you could do something that's really good for you, get those resources, and immediately cash out those resources and do the fun, awesome thing. I think the game would be a much worse experience if you only ever took 1 action a turn, because there would be much more anxiety over playing a really good setup card and just hoping that by the time it comes back around to you, nobody has screwed with it. But the flip side is, I think if you were forced to take 2 actions every single turn, you would not have this extra decision of potentially trying to stall out your opponent. So I love having it in the game. I think it's a really neat extra thing to think about. And when we play, we usually default to just taking 1 action and then the next person goes on. And if you want to take 2 actions, you mentioned, by the way, I'm going to take 2 actions, and then you do it because that speeds up gameplay and you don't constantly have people saying, are you taking a second action? No, yes, no. And I think that's probably a good way to do it. But yeah, it's just a great addition to the game. And now for positive number 4, I've got to mention the wonderful thematic and mechanical integration that goes on in this game. First of all, from a theme perspective, you are doing some really cool big stuff as you're playing this game. Many times I found myself drawing a card and being like, whoa, this is awesome. Not necessarily because of the actions that you're doing, but hypothetically what's going on. You're building a gigantic space lens that is focusing the sun's rays into a small point to heat up the planet. You might be detonating nuclear explosions, creating volcanoes, crashing an entire moon into the surface of the planet. And you know what? When you crash that moon, you do it on your opponent's area, so it destroys some of their plants. It's just really big, cool stuff. In addition to like maybe trying to search for life with the Mars rover, creating microbes, tending to pets in your cities. There are so many different things that you're doing in this game, and they just seem fun and cool. I think that the game could have gone with lamer stuff, and they decided, no, let's do big, awesome, cool stuff as you're playing this game, and I love the thrill of drawing a lot of these cards. And the flip side is that the mechanical integration is wonderful. Like when you crash an asteroid into the planet, you kind of feel like you're crashing an asteroid into the planet. If you're building a remote scientific facility, well, you have to put it in a spot that's not adjacent to anybody else, so that thematically works. When you are, when you develop anti-gravity, you are going to be able to play these cards for cheaper, and you can only do that when you have enough science. So that thematically makes sense. You have to build a science infrastructure before you can do that. There's just so many cool things that you can do that get you victory points, but also just make you feel cool while you're playing the game, and I love that. Let's now move into a few neutral points, and the first really is the biggest elephant in the room when it comes to this game. card draw luck and how much does it matter. With the base rules of the game, you're going to be drawing 4 cards in your hand and buying from those, and those are the ones you see. But there is an official variant in the rulebook that says you could do a draft. You will pick one of those 4 cards, pass the 3 to your left, and then get 3 more from the person on your right, and then pick from those. So you will see many more cards, and for me, this is almost mandatory when I'm playing this game. I could maybe be convinced to play without it if there are 5 people around the table and none of them have played the game before, or we just don't have enough time, because this drafting variant does make the game go longer, depending on the number of players. Sure, you draft simultaneously, but it's just more decisions that everybody has to make. But for me, it is a worthy sacrifice to make the game go a little bit longer, to have the extra decisions that are really wonderful, deciding which cards do you take and which cards do you potentially take just to make sure that your opponent doesn't have access to them, but also just to see more cards to potentially put together a better, cooler engine in front of you. So it plays fine with the standard rules. I don't think it has a card draw luck problem with that, but you do have the possibility of drawing 4 cards that you just are really going to hate, and I think that the drafting variant totally fixes that, and it's the way that I pretty much always want to play. Neutral number 2 is also a pretty big elephant in the room, and that has to do with the Take That style cards that come in the box. This is a Euro style game, but it's a little weird having these cards that you can play that just directly mess with your opponents, and from my experience, they have not been anywhere near as bad as I was worried they would be based off of what I had heard before I played the game. In general, what they do is they reduce the amount of resources that somebody has, or they might subtly affect the resource generation. And that is not good. Obviously, you're not going to like it when somebody comes over and reduces the income that you might make every single round, but they're never going to come over and destroy a card that you have built in front of you. So the main engines with the tags and with the blue cards are never going to be affected. It's really just the resource generation that will be subtly affected. And in general, there are ways to bolster those back up again. If they reduce your energy, well, then you do one of the main actions on the board. You don't even need a card for it to spend some money to get that energy back up to where you need it to be. And sure, that costs you money, and it does directly affect the people across the table, but it does not just throw a monkey wrench into their wheels and just cause them to stall and explode. It's just a bit of a bummer when it happens to you. It also gives you the ability to kind of check somebody who seems to be doing really well. If maybe you think somebody's just been drawing the best cards and, oh, they have so much card luck, well, then maybe play these Take That style cards at them and slowly, subtly slow them down so that you can catch up. And if multiple people think that, then the leader might get affected by that more. But honestly, from my plays of the game, I've never really seen somebody get beat up that much. In fact, I've seen entire games of this get played where no Take That style cards are played at all, because people just like the look of other cards, and in general, you have to pay $3 to buy that card, and then there's usually a cost to play it. It's usually not much, but there is a cost involved there, and I just think that that's a really good balance. You can play the game as mean as you want to, and I like that it's in there as an option. It's a pretty neat, fresh thing on a Euro-style engine building game, and I think thematically it also works in as you're competing and jostling on the planet. For the most part, what's going to happen is you're going to crash asteroids down and potentially destroy some plants from your opponent, or that get destroyed from you, and that means that's maybe one less forest tile you put out on the board for a couple less points at the end of the game. And that might make or break how you do in the game, whether or not you win, but it's not messing with your engine too much, and I think that is the important bit. Neutral number 3 has to do with the optional asymmetric corporation cards that you can play with in the game. Now, this is a neutral point because on the one hand, I think you should always play with them. They are super cool, they are super fun to play with, and they give you lots of different options to play one game differently from the next. But on the other hand, I'm not convinced that they are completely balanced. Now, I've not played the game enough times to say that, oh, this one corporation is underpowered and this other one is overpowered, but it does seem like some are conditionally better than others. Like, one in particular gives you a bunch of benefits if there are lots of cities out on the planet. And if you're playing a 4 to 5 player game, there's probably going to be a lot more cities out there than if you're playing a 2-player game. I played a 2-player game once where there were 2 cities total, and one of them wasn't even on the planet, so it wouldn't have affected that corporation. So that one corporation is kind of situationally terrible or amazing, and I played with that corporation once, and I won by like 30 points. It was a 4-player game. My 3 opponents were all within 5 points of each other, and then I was just humongously ahead, and I'm not really sure if it's because that corporation was overpowered, but I feel like I did a very good job of leveraging that corporation. I feel like I should have won. I played that game very well, but maybe not by quite that much. So I'm not going to authoritatively say that these are unbalanced. I have some concerns about it, but it's not going to stop me from playing with them every single game, and I enjoy the variety that they add. And now for the last neutral, which is number 4, and that relates to the corporate era variant that comes in the box. This does 3 things to the overall gaming experience. The first is that you shuffle a rather significant number of cards into that main deck, and it increases the variety of cards that you get to play with as you're playing the game. And in general, I like variety, so every game I've played, except for one, I've had those shuffled in anyway, regardless of the couple other things that I may or may not have been doing. So I think the game plays well just having all the cards in the stack. So the second thing that happens, and it's a really big one, is that you're supposed to start at 0 on all the tracks instead of 1 for all the resources that you generate at the beginning of your turn. And I have played the game with all those corporate era cards in the deck in both of those situations. And like I said, I think it plays fine if you are starting at 1 resource generation for everything with those corporate era cards in the stack. I think there's only 2 cards that are a little bit overpowered because of that, but that's such a minor thing. I'm not too worried about it. We did play one game where we started at 0. It was a 2-player game. I played it with Jessica. And there is something nice about knowing that the engine that you have built throughout this game is exactly the one that you made the decisions for. Like, there's no freebies, like starting out with extra plants and extra steel and titanium. You don't get to put a forest down on the 8th generation because you've been making 1 plant every generation for 8 of them, and then, hey, freebie forest, even though you never cared about plants at all, perhaps, in this one specific play of the game. This does mean that the game is going to go a little bit longer because your engines are a little bit slower, right? They don't have that head start of starting at 1 for everything. It's not a drastic change, like maybe it would make the game go 1 generation longer or something like that, or maybe even just half a generation, in which case it would not affect things too much. Jessica really liked the way it was a more pure engine building experience. Like, it was really just exactly what you made. From my perspective, I could take it or leave it. I think it's going to depend on how much time I have to play the game and how long I'm okay with the actual game going. I'll probably play at 0 and play at 1 based on the number of players around the table and how experienced they are with the game as well. But it's really nice to have those 2 options. And I guess the third thing that the corporate era expansion does is it adds 2 more corporations into the variety of asymmetric options you have at the beginning of the game. So all in all, it's really awesome that's in the box. And to a certain extent, I kind of feel like you should just play the game with everything in there and, play at the ones and don't worry about it. Let's now jump over to a couple negative points, and they're both relatively simple. The first is just that I feel like the game goes on a little longer than I'd like. I did mention that the drafting variant, which is almost mandatory for me, does add extra time, probably between 20 and 40 minutes based on the player count, but I do think it's worth it. I think it makes the game much better overall. I just wish that it was a couple less generations. It seems like near the end of every game I've played, I've been like, yeah, I'm pretty much ready for this to wrap up. And I suppose I could house rule that by reducing the thresholds we need on the different terraforming tracks, and maybe I'll experiment around with that based on how much time I have to sit down and actually play the game. But yeah, I think a slightly shorter game in general would have been nice. And negative number 2 has to do with the disjointed art and the production quality of the game. I'm not going to harp on this too much. It's just a little weird having one card have a photo, the next card is a computer-generated image from NASA, and the third one is a painting. It's very disjointed. I know there are hundreds of cards in this game, so the licensing fees to artists and stock photos, I think most likely, were probably humongous because of all these unique cards. But that being said, the disjointedness kind of caught me off guard. It hasn't affected everybody like this. In fact, Jessica loves the disjointed art, and she thinks that it's great having all that variety. So it's not terrible for everybody. And then from a production standpoint, the player mats, they're so easily bonkable, and you have all these different tracks. There are many different things you can buy to make that better, but this is already a pretty expensive game, and I feel like maybe something could have been done to make that a little bit more stationary in front of you. I've never had a catastrophic bump, and I've always played the game without any of these extra things that you can buy on, but I feel like a little bit more attention to detail on how you're actually playing the game would have been nice in the box. Let's now discuss the variability for Terraforming Mars, and I think that it is way above average for 2 different reasons. The first is that massive deck of cards. There are hundreds in there. They're all different, so every time you sit down to play the game, you're going to see a different card mix, and you're going to put these cards together in different ways, and I just think that's really great. I don't feel like I've even come close to exploring all the potential options in that humongous deck. And the other thing is the asymmetric corporations. They're just fun to play with. They will cause you to play one game significantly differently than the next based off of different tags that you might have discounts on, or just maybe you are able to do different things with the various resources you have in front of you. It's a great variety of corporations, it's an astonishing variety of cards, and it makes the variability of this game very high. This game plays 1 to 5 players, and I've never played solo, so I'm not going to comment on that, but I have played the rest of them. And it has this interesting thing where the game always ends after you hit all of the 3 different terraforming goals. And that means that in a 2-player game, you're going to do a lot more stuff than you are in a 5-player game because it's the same pie, just split up into smaller and smaller chunks. In that 2-player game, you each get half of the pie, so you're going to have these humongous engines. You will have done half of the work for terraforming the planet, versus the 5-player game, you will have only potentially done around a fifth of it. So the game is going to end with you having done just less things in the 5-player game. And because of that, even though I think it's good at all of these counts, I think it is best at the lower player counts, specifically 3 players, because when you are drafting, you are going to see more cards when you're drafting around the table than in the 2-player experience. But I think that 2-player is just really great. I played it a couple times with Jessica, and we both very much enjoyed that setting. The 4-player game was fine, but downtime started to set in. And again, with 5 players, you have downtime of just waiting for it to come back around to you. And you just get such a tiny sliver of that pie that you don't feel like you build anywhere near as cool and interesting an engine by the time the game actually ends. In conclusion, I've played Terraforming Mars 5 times, and it has blown me away. And I'm pretty surprised by this because, well, I went into it expecting to dislike it. And part of that is because I was just feeling like a contrarian. I think I was a bit put off by the extreme amount of hype that was around this game in the middle portions of last year. So many people were talking about how it was just this amazing, amazing game, just talking about how it's just so good, it's the best game of the year, and all this kind of thing. And then I'd see photos online. I'm like, that board looks really boring. There's like 3 different types of tiles you're putting down, and you're not even putting that many tiles down. And then you have these cards with the weird art. And I took a look at the rule book, and it was kind of hard to get through without having the actual game in front of me. And I just didn't get it. I played a game at Board Game Geek Con to just see what everything was about. Again, going into it expecting to walk away saying, it wasn't actually that great. But instead, I really enjoyed that play, and so I set up another play a couple weeks later at Victory Point Cafe, 3 players, and we played that one, and that was the moment. I was like, you know what, I've got to have this game. This is actually really good. I bought their last store copy, and I played it 3 more times since then, and I really am very happy to own this game because it is just a wonderful engine building experience, and I love engine building games. And at this point, I could say this is one of my favorite engine building games that I've ever played. I'm looking forward to playing it many more times. It's great that it plays well at 2 players. It's to really just get into building all those engines, especially considering you get to build the biggest engines when you're in that 2-player experience. I love the thematic integration. I love how cool the cards are from a process perspective. Like, you are crashing that moon down, you are building these viruses, you're doing all sorts of really kooky things. You're fostering predators that are going to go out and eat the animals of other people's areas. There's just all these kooky things that you can do that just feel fun, they feel interactive, and I just really love sitting down to play this game. Even though it maybe goes a little bit long, and even though I feel like the drafting variant is pretty much mandatory when I'm playing this game, all that comes together to still just a wonderful experience sitting at the table. I feel so satisfied when I finish playing this game, and I really couldn't recommend this one more. And now I'd like to thank everyone who's been supporting this channel through Patreon, including all of these producer level pledges. If you too would like to support everything that I do here for these videos, you can do so at patreon.com/JonGetsGames, and I'd really appreciate it. Also, if you'd like to see more in-depth board game reviews like this one, as well as full game playthroughs and vlogs, please subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.